Thank you for joining us again here today on the Cloud for Utilities stage. Joining Rick and I is Chad Sweet. He is the co-founder of the Chertoff Group, which is a global advisory firm and investment bank focused on security. Previously, Chad was the chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security. He was an investment banker with Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and was also in a senior position with the CIA. Chad Sweet, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, we looked at your career path from the CIA to the Department of Homeland Security. How did that prepare you for what you do today as co-founder of the Chertoff Group?
I think the main things are when you're in the CIA, you deal with intelligence gathering and covert operations abroad, which teaches you a lot about what can go wrong, and the risks that we face internationally. Inversely, in Homeland Security, you're responsible for everything stateside, not only for terrorism, but also for natural disasters. So I think from that standpoint, both jobs really enabled me to have a better appreciation for a holistic series of both man-made and natural disasters. And I think given that we advise clients today on how to manage their overall risk and to do it in a cost-effective, risk-based approach, I think that was one of the most foundational things for me to experience. And we try to take those same principles learned, from the real-world experience, both abroad and at home, and allow our clients to be, more resilient, accelerate growth, and gain competitive advantage through using security as an enabler.
So, Chad, we read a lot about foreign interference in the previous elections.
Right, yeah.
And we're coming off of election where everybody's going to gear up for 2020. We're nonstop campaigning here in the United States. But are you still seeing foreign interference?
Right now, if you look at 2018, what's interesting is it wasn't immediately evident, but what you're going to see is that the president signed an executive order that requires that the FBI and DHS produce a report within 45 days of the election that will provide an answer to your question regarding election infrastructure. Was there any tampering or interference with the election infrastructure? And then in parallel with the infrastructure report, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, will provide an assessment on were there any other attempts at influence or interference through social media like Facebook, Google, et cetera. And so those two reports will be coming out. And that's when, as a nation, we'll have a better holistic view. My early assessment, though, is that what you'll see from not-for-profit organizations that are using open source to follow this, along with what we've seen. For example, the Atlantic Council has a thing called the Digital Forensic Lab. Already we know for a fact that there were accounts that various social media providers identified as being botnets or controlled by foreign entities posing as U.S. citizens. Those were taken down. So we know it's not that the Russians sat this one out. It's that they've just upped their game in terms of the level of sophistication by which they're trying to influence our elections.
Chad, you mentioned Facebook. I mean, Facebook has a big challenge. It connected 2 billion people around the world. Do you think they're taking the right steps, or should they be doing more to protect from outside influence?
I think all the social media providers are struggling with this challenge, Amos, and I think it's, on the one hand, critical that they not allow themselves to be weaponized. And I think, unfortunately, even by the founder of Facebook, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, I think openly acknowledged that Facebook didn't realize the extent to which their platform was being exploited. And I think they've done a number of important steps to try to counter that, including, literally hiring thousands of employees now that are sole function is to go through and identify any attempts by foreign adversaries or improper use of their platform, not only by state actors, but also by hate groups. And as a result of that, I think things are improving. The challenge that they have is significant in that, obviously, freedom of speech is a principle in which this country was founded. And I think that's where they're working really hard to try to find the balance between the two. The good news is that it's actually easier to counter a foreign adversary because they don't have a First Amendment right to be influencing our election. I think we, as Americans, and it doesn't matter what part of the political spectrum you're on, we can all agree, I think, that we want our democracy to have to be independent, and our elections should be decided by Americans, not by foreigners. So when you identify that a Twitter account or a Facebook account is not authentic, it's much easier legally to take that down than it is for American citizen that is legitimately expressing some form of protest or opposition view. So I think what will be important to watch is how do we go about taking the countering foreign influence program to a whole nother level. And it can't just be throwing bodies at this. If you look at it, for example, let me give you a quick example. The technologies today are evolving to where, you've seen this, Amos, in your own experience in political campaigns, where there are things called deep fakes. And what do I mean by that? A deep fake is where if I have enough audio of you speaking, either through Facebook videos or pictures and audio that have been posted, I can use technology, deep fake technology, to synthesize and basically take snippets of your voice and combine that to synthetically put words in your mouth that to the human ear will sound exactly as if you were speaking. It's your voice, it's your tone. And it's very difficult to determine that it's in fact not you that said that, but it is your voice. And the same thing can be done too with visual images. There's a lot of ability to doctor that. And so this type of deep fake technology can be countered, though. There are things like you can determine by looking at the speed with which a human eye is blinking. Is that photo being accelerated from a speed point of view? Can I tell from indications of your pulse on your skin? I can also tell through a whole host of machine learning techniques, indicators that would flag whether something's authentic or not. And so these types of technologies married with that increased focus, I think really give Facebook, Google, Twitter, and a lot of the other technology providers some exciting new tools to counter our adversaries that are attempting to influence our elections.
Let me bring it back to the energy industry. You hear a lot of conversations about protecting the grid, keeping the grid secure. Are we doing enough, or should we do more?
I think that of all the industries that we work with at the Chertoff Group, the utility sector is really leading the way. They know because of their mission. If a donut shop is down one day, it's bad because you don't get your coffee and you're going to be grumpy in the morning because you didn't your donut. If the utilities are down, right, you can not only have significant disruption, but you could have life-threatening scenarios. So public utilities understand that they have an extraordinarily important safety mission. And so what we've seen, at least, them do is they're doing some of the most advanced techniques for making the grid more resilient against cyber attacks, especially as many of them are adopting, going to the cloud, which in some respects, people intuitively would say, well, that's going to make the networks more exposed. It is true that there are more points of vulnerability than there were in a pre-cloud, pre-digital era. But on the flip side of that, if they take the cloud and then use their resources combined with other utility providers, they're able to join a battle together and take the strength of numbers. They get to combine all those resources together and actually have security facilities and procedures that rise to a standard that any one of them individually could not afford on their own. And this is particularly true for the mid-sized and smaller, we're called co-ops or utilities that are in rural communities that can never afford the kind of security that they can now access through the cloud. The last thing I would say too is we've really been impressed with the industry has done a model that we think other industries should look at, which is built off of their physical security procedures to make it resilient. So as we just saw the hurricanes in the South, in Florida, for example, in Tallahassee, you'll notice there were a lot of utility trucks that came down from the north. And that's called the Emergency Mutual Assistance Compact, or EMAC. the same compact that utilities have in the physical world to come to each other's aid. They've developed the first industry that we've seen do what are called a cyber emergency mutual assistance compact. So if one utility is experiencing a devastating cyber attack, the other utilities are able to then weigh in and give additional assistance to the one that's being targeted. So that's really an encouraging, I think, example of how the utility sector is really leading the way.
Chad, a lot of companies, utilities are moving to the cloud now. Do you think they're doing enough to be secure?
I think the jury's out in terms of how much is secure. Right now, if you look at it on balance, the answer is yes. I think they're looking to tap into security cloud providers that actually are demonstrating that they have made security not an afterthought, but part of the cloud offering. And that's really what you have to do. If you think about, just like any other service, not all service providers are equal. So if you're a utility thinking about moving to the cloud, there's a series of basic security questions that you really need to ask to protect yourself and your employees and your customers. You need to think about, if I need to, is my data going to be able to be retrieved back to my company if I ever had to change providers? And today, from a security point of view, it's important that data be protected while it's at rest, meaning encryption. Is my data encrypted at rest, not only in motion? What is the situation if all this data at the end of the day, we talk about the cloud, but the truth is behind the cloud, all that data has to come down to the physical world of a server somewhere on the planet. It doesn't exist in the ether. And so a physical facility has to be secure, got to have redundancy, right? So can they give you confidence that the facility is backed up? And if so, how many backups do they have to that data center? What is their ability? How often do they also do the digital backup? So if one center gets destroyed by an earthquake, how much latency will there be in the backup? Is it 1 week backup? So I'll lose 1 week of data. Is it 1 day? Is it 1 hour? Those are, if you're in certain industries, a day's loss of data versus a week is extraordinarily different in order of magnitude loss. And you need to know that going into it. So again, not all cloud providers are equal, but I think utilities are asking the right questions to make sure that they can tell who are the A players that really put security first.
So thank you all for joining us today. It's an honor to share the Cloud for Utility stage with Chad Sweet, the co-founder of the Chertoff Group. So
it's an honor to be here.
Chad,
Amos,
thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.